Diego Mendoza was 52 years old and worth $3 billion, but he had never found a woman who loved him for who he truly was. After 3 costly divorces and dozens of self-serving relationships, she decided to try an experiment that would change her life forever. He summoned 4 women to his mansion in Madrid. Carmen, the fashion designer I had been visiting for months. Paloma, the lawyer he had met in society. Lucia, the model he had met at a party. And finally, Sofia, the young Andalusian employee who had been working for him silently for a year. He gave each of them a black credit card with no limits, telling them they had 24 hours to spend whatever they wanted. He was convinced that they would all jump on his money, as they always did. But what Sofia did with that credit card shocked him so much that he cried for the first time in 20 years, discovering that true love had been right under his nose all along. Diego Mendoza woke up that November morning in his 2,000 square meters mansion in La Moraleja, feeling the weight of loneliness that had accompanied him for years. By 52, he had built a financial empire spanning everything from real estate to technology. But every professional success was marred by the failure of his personal relationships. 3 marriages ended badly, all with women who had revealed themselves interested only in his money. The first one with Claudia, a Madrid heiress who had caught him cheating on him with his best friend. Second with Patricia, a Brazilian model who had tried to steal him during the divorce. The third with Valeria, a journalist who had pretended to love him for 3 years only to write a book about his private life. Now single for 2 years, Diego had surrounded himself with beautiful but superficial women who sought him out for his status. He was tired of feeling like a walking ATM, tired of doubting every smile, every caress, every declaration of love. That morning, while drinking the coffee prepared by his employee Sofia, he had an epiphany. He would conduct a test. An experiment that would reveal to him once and for all whether there still existed a woman capable of loving without ulterior motives. Sofia Jimenez was 28 years old and came from Seville. She had been working for Diego for a year, always silent and efficient. He had come to Madrid to support his family, who remained in Andalusia. The mother was sick, the father was unemployed, and 2 younger brothers were studying. She wasn't particularly beautiful by the standards Diego was accustomed to, but there was something in her eyes that intrigued him, a purity that seemed out of place in that world of appearances. Diego called his 3 current hangouts. Carmen Ruiz, 35, a successful designer with a studio in the Salamanca district. She was elegant, refined, always perfectly made up and dressed. She had been courting him for 6 months, with the obvious goal of becoming the 4th Mrs. Mendoza. Paloma Garcia, 40, a renowned lawyer specializing in international law. He had studied at Oxford, spoke 5 languages, and handled multi-million-dollar cases. She was as intelligent as she was ambitious, seeing in Diego an opportunity to enter Spanish high finance. Lucia Martin, 25, a model and influencer, with 2 million followers on Instagram. She was the youngest and most physically spectacular, but also the most obvious in her intentions. He made no secret of his dream of a life of luxury and first-class travel. At 3, he asked them to come to his mansion at 4 p.m. for a special surprise. He then turned to Sofia, who was arranging flowers in the main hall, asking her to stay and be present at the meeting. At 4 o'clock sharp, the 3 women arrived almost simultaneously. Carmen with her red Mercedes, Paloma with her black business Audi, and Lucia with a white SUV gifted to her by a businessman ex-boyfriend. All very elegant, all smiling, all curious to discover the surprise. They settled into the main hall, the one with the marble fireplace and the 10th century paintings, which were as good as any normal house. Sofia stood by the door, still confused as to why Diego had asked her to stay. Diego came in with a tray on which were 4 black credit cards, the kind that only the wealthiest clients of private banks can obtain. He explained his experiment. I would give each one a card connected to their main account with no spending limits. They had 24 hours to buy whatever they wanted without having to answer to anyone. The eyes of the 3 guests lit up immediately. Sofia, on the other hand, seemed even more confused, protesting that she couldn't accept it, that it wasn't fair because she worked for him. Diego sweetly insisted, explaining that for 24 hours she was not his employee, but simply Sofia, a woman free to do whatever she wanted. The four women left the mansion with completely different emotions. Three of them were already mentally planning their shopping trip. One of them, however, was about to show Diego Mendoza what it really meant to have a heart of gold. Carmen Ruiz left the mansion with a black credit card clutched in her hand and her heart pounding. The list of things he would buy was already forming in his mind. His first stop was Bulgari on Calle Serrano, where he bought a $180,000 diamond parure he had been eyeing for months, also adding a $40,000 watch. He then headed to Hermes for 3 Kelly bags in different colors, investing a further $150,000. In the afternoon, he visited the capital's top ateliers, ordering 5 bespoke evening dresses for $70,000. The day concluded with the purchase of a car, a $120,000 white Porsche Cayenne, which he had delivered straight to his home. Total spent $650,000. Paloma Garcia had a more strategic approach. As a seasoned lawyer, she saw this opportunity as an investment in her future. He started by purchasing a 120 square meters apartment in Salamanca for 1.5 million euros, thinking that owning a property in that area was always a smart choice. In the afternoon, she went to Tiffany for jewelry that would retain its value over time. A 3-carat diamond ring, natural pearl earrings, and an emerald necklace for $300,000. She completed the day by buying shares in a tech startup, investing another $200,000. She spent a total of $2 million. Lucia Martin lived those 24 hours as if it were a dream come true. It started with a shopping session at Gucci, Prada, and Versace, buying 18 handbags, 30 pairs of shoes, and 40 sign dresses. He then commissioned a complete line of limited edition Louis Vuitton luggage. In the afternoon, he booked a suite at the Plaza Hotel in New York for a month, paying $50,000 in advance. That night, he threw an impromptu party on the rooftop of the Villa Magna Hotel, spending $30,000 on champagne, Dom Perignon, and beluga caviar. Before going to sleep, she bought a $100,000 Rolex Daytona online and booked 2 weeks in the Maldives for $80,000. Total spent $600,000. Sofia Jimenez stood in the mansion's parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at that credit card as if it were an alien object. He had never owned a credit card in his life. All his purchases were made with the cash he earned, counted and recounted down to the last cent. His first reaction was panic. How could I spend someone else's money? But then he remembered Diego's words. For 24 hours, she wasn't his employee. She was simply Sofia. His first stop was Gregorio Marañón Hospital, where he showed up at the administrative office with his heart in his throat. Her mother needed a heart operation that the public health system had scheduled for the following year. With that card, Sofia paid for a private operation within a week, $15,000, which would save her mother's life. He then went to Complutense University and paid all of his 2 brothers' outstanding university fees, plus another 3 years in advance, $12,000, which would guarantee them a career without the financial burden on the family. In the afternoon, he went to the owner of the house where his parents lived in Seville and paid the rent for the next 5 years, $36,000, which would ensure the family would end up on the streets. That night, he bought a plane ticket to Seville for the next day, $200 to go hug his mother and give her the good news. Before returning home, Sofia made one last purchase. He went into a small bookstore and bought a book of Lorca's poetry that cost $15. She had always been an avid reader, but had never been able to afford new books. Total spent $63,215. That night, while the other 3 women slept between dreams of luxury and new purchases, Sofia lay awake crying with joy, thinking about the smile she would see on her mother's face. He had something more precious than any jewel, the possibility of having saved the life of the person he loved most in the world. Diego had all purchases controlled by his security companies. What he had discovered about Sofia had kept him awake all night, shocking him in ways he had never experienced before. Diego Mendoza couldn't close his eyes that night. The detailed reports on the four women's expenses had shocked him, but what he had read about Sophia had impacted him more deeply than anything else in his life. At 7 in the morning, I was already dressed, and in the car headed to the Lavapese neighborhood where Sophia lived. When she opened the door, still in her pajamas and with her eyes swollen with tears of happiness, she was speechless seeing her boss. Diego looked at her and saw her for the first time. Even without her work uniform, Sophia had a natural beauty that struck him. But above all, in her eyes I saw a purity that I had forgotten could exist. The apartment was small but very clean, with photos of the Andalusian family on the walls. Diego explained that he had controlled how she had used the credit card. Sophia froze, thinking she had spent too much, but he stopped her. I hadn't spent too much, I had spent very little. In 24 hours, Sophia had spent $63,000 not on herself, but to save his mother's life, for the education of his siblings, for the safety of the family. The only thing for herself had been a $15 poetry book. When Diego asked her what she thought of him, Sophia looked him in the eyes for the first time. His words were direct. He felt sorry for him. He lived in a huge house, but he was always alone. He had everything, but he never smiled. He received calls of love, but as soon as he hung up, he became sad. Those words hit Diego like arrows to the heart. It was the first time someone had told him the unfiltered truth. Sophia had understood that this was a test, but instead of throwing herself at his money, she had done what anyone with a heart would do, help the family. Diego realized that the other three women had spent $3.5 million on themselves, while Sophia had spent $63,000 to save the lives and futures of others. He knelt before Mary and asked her to marry him. When she protested that she was just an Andalusian employee, he replied that she was the only person who saw him as a man, not an ATM. And he kissed her while in that small apartment the truest love Diego Mendoza had ever known was born. That night at Diego's mansion, the final confrontation of the experiment took place. The four women showed up punctually at 8, but the atmosphere was completely different from the day before. Diego had a serious expression, and Sophia was sitting next to him with an engagement ring on her finger that sparkled under the lights from the chandelier. Carmen was the first to notice the ring, and her smile immediately faded. When she asked for an explanation, Diego announced directly that Sophia was his fiancée and that within a month she would become his wife. The silence that followed was deafening. Paloma, Lucia, and Carmen looked at each other in disbelief, trying to understand if it was a joke or reality. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. Diego stood up and started walking in front of them with the expense reports in his hand. Before explaining why I chose Sophia, I wanted to review together how they had used the credit cards. He addressed Carmen, reminding her that she had spent $650,000 on jewelry, handbags, dresses, and a car. All for herself, all for her personal pleasure. When I had given him that card, the first thing I had thought about was finally being able to buy whatever I wanted without limits. He reminded Paloma that he had spent 2 million euros on an apartment, jewelry, and investments. Smarter than the others, she had immediately thought of how to multiply the money he was giving her. I had seen in that card a business opportunity, not a gesture of love. He pointed out to Lucia that he had spent $600,000 in 24 hours on handbags, shoes, parties, and vacations. He had treated that card like it was his birthday and Christmas together, buying him everything he had ever wanted, without thinking about anything else. Diego stopped in front of Sophia, who looked at him with eyes full of love and concern. He explained that Sophia had spent $63,000 not to buy jewelry or handbags or luxury cars, but to pay for a heart operation for her mother, university fees for her siblings, and rent for her parents. The only thing he had bought for himself was a $15 poetry book. Diego's voice began to tremble with emotion. When she saw her purchases, she cried. She had cried because for the first time in 34 years, she had met a woman who had thought of others before herself. She had cried because she had understood that love still existed, even though she had stopped believing in it. Carmen stood up furious, accusing him of having carried out a cruel experiment, of having made them believe that they were important to him. Diego replied that they had been important, but not for the right reasons. None of them had ever asked him how he was, if he was happy, if he needed anything. Sophia, on the other hand, had noticed everything. She made his coffee the way he liked it. She learned his favorite books. She realized he hated Monday meetings, and she always left him a little surprise on his desk. When Paloma objected that Sophia was a good girl, but that they came from different worlds, Diego replied that they had the only thing that really mattered in common. They loved each other for who they were, not for what they could give. He thanked the three women for participating in his experiment, explaining that the cards were connected to an account he had closed that morning. The purchases they had made would remain theirs as a parting gift. When Lucia protested that she truly loved him, Diego was direct. She loved the idea of being Diego Mendoza's wife. She loved first-class travel and Cartier jewelry, but she didn't love him. One by one, the three women left the mansion. Carmen and Paloma with rage, Lucia with despair. When the door closed, Diego and Sophia were left alone in the great hall, which for the first time in years didn't seem empty. Sophia asked him if he was sure what he was doing, and Diego replied that he had spent 20 years looking for love in all the wrong places. Now that he had found him, he would never let him get away again. At that moment, he understood that the true treasure was not the $3 billion he had in the bank, but the heart of gold of the woman who had chosen to love him for who he was, not for what he owned. The months that followed were the most intense and happiest of Diego's life. Planning a wedding with Sophia was a completely different experience than before. There were no $100,000 wedding planners or dream locations. Sophia wanted a simple ceremony, surrounded by the people who truly love them. The first problem was Sophia's family. When she called the parents in Seville to tell them about the engagement, their reaction was complete disbelief. How could her daughter marry one of the richest men in Spain? Diego decided to fly to Seville to meet his future in-laws. He arrived without an escort, without luxury cars, dressed simply in jeans and a white shirt. When he knocked on the door of the small house on Feria Street, where the Jimenez family lived, it was Jose, Sophia's father, who opened the door without recognizing him. It was the beginning of a conversation that lasted all night. Diego told Sophia's parents how she had won him over with her purity of spirit, with the generosity she demonstrated by using the credit card to save the family instead of buying things for herself. Jose and Carmen understood that this very rich man truly loved his daughter when they saw him get emotional telling how Sophia prepared her coffee every morning, how she had learned her tastes, how she had managed to fill with warmth a house that for years had been nothing but a cold museum. That night, before going to sleep in the small guest room prepared by Carmen, Diego had a private conversation with Jose. Sophia's father made it clear that if he harmed his daughter, he would personally come to Madrid to find him, rich or not. Diego replied that if he had hurt him, Jose would have to get in line, because he would be the first to never forgive him. The wedding was held months later in a small church in Malesana. Sophia was wearing her grandmother's dress, simple and elegant, altered by a neighborhood seamstress. Diego had chosen a plain dark blue suit. There were 50 guests, Sophia's family from Andalusia, Diego's few true friends, and some colleagues who sincerely respected him. There were no journalists, worldly photographers, or famous people, just people who truly loved them. During the ceremony, when the priest asked Diego if he would take Sophia as his wife, his voice trembling with emotion could be heard in the church as he promised to love and protect her all the days of his life. When it was Sophia's turn, she looked him in the eye, explaining that he had given her the chance to save her mother, to get her siblings to study, to provide security for the family, but above all, he had given her the chance to love and be loved. The party was in the garden of Diego's mansion, organized by Sophia with the help of Carmen and the other women of the family. Homemade Andalusian cuisine, live music with musician friends, and dancing that lasted until dawn. That night, when all the guests had left and Diego and Sophia were finally alone, he looked at her in disbelief at having found happiness so unexpectedly. Sophia gently caressed his face, explaining that he was a normal man, one who had worked all his life, who had built himself up, who had suffered and learned to appreciate the real things. The fact that he had a lot of money made him no different from his father, who had always worked honestly to support the family. And on that June night, in the mansion that for years had been merely a display of wealth, a true family built on genuine love and mutual respect was finally born. 2 years after that wedding, which had caused a stir due to its simplicity, Diego and Sofia were living a life that neither of them had imagined possible. The Madrid mansion had been transformed from a cold museum into a house full of life and warmth. Sofia had not changed her character despite having become one of the richest women in Spain. She kept waking up early to make breakfast for Diego. He continued to take care of the house personally. He continued sending part of his monthly allowance to his family in Seville. Diego had discovered joys he had never known before. Every morning, he woke up happy knowing that Sofia was there. I had learned to cook alongside her on Sundays. I had started reading books of poetry. He had even learned a few words of the Andalusian dialect to speak to his in-laws. The biggest change was in the way they managed their businesses. Influenced by Sofia's social sensitivity, Diego had transformed part of his empire into companies that created jobs in southern Spain. He had opened 3 factories in Andalusia, hiring hundreds of people with decent wages. But the greatest joy came when Sofia announced that she was pregnant. Diego burst into tears in front of the pregnancy test, realizing that he was about to have the family he had always dreamed of without knowing it. During her 9 months of pregnancy, Sofia did something that shocked Spanish high society. She refused to give birth in an expensive private clinic, wanting to go to the public hospital where she was born in Seville, to prove that even the children of the rich could be born where everyone else is. Little Jose Mendoza, named after his grandfather, was born one March morning in a room at the Virgen del Rocío Hospital in Seville, surrounded by the love of his parents and maternal grandparents, who cried tears of joy. Diego, who had attended the birth holding Sofia's hand, understood at that moment what it really meant to be rich. It wasn't the $3 billion in the bank that made him lucky, but that child crying in his arms and that woman looking at him with eyes full of love. Months after Jose's birth, Diego made a decision that shocked the Spanish financial world. He announced that he would donate 90% of his assets to charity, keeping only what served to guarantee a decent life for the family. During the press conference, he explained that money doesn't bring happiness, love does, and that he had enough love to be rich for the rest of his life. Mary was at his side during that announcement with little Joseph in her arms. When journalists asked her what she thought of her husband's decision, she responded with the simplicity that had always characterized her. Diego had always had everything that made him happy. Now he had decided to simply share the superfluous with those who needed it. The Mendoza Jimenez Foundation quickly became one of the most important charities in Europe. He built schools in southern Spain. He financed scholarships for deserving but poor children. He paid for surgeries for families who couldn't afford them. Sofia personally managed many of the projects, traveling around Spain to ensure the money was used appropriately. Diego often accompanied her, discovering a satisfaction in seeing the concrete results of his help that he had never experienced in business. One afternoon, while watching the sunset from the mansion's terrace with little Jose sleeping in his stroller, Diego took stock of his life. Sofia replied that she hadn't given up on a normal life, but that she had a really normal one. A life where you wake up in the morning happy to see the person you love, where you raise a child together, where you help people in need. She added, smiling, that she had not married a rich man, but one who made her richer every day. That night, as they put little Jose to bed, Diego looked at his family and understood that he had won the most important lottery in life, not the money lottery, which he had won alone, but the love lottery, won thanks to the pure heart of an Andalusian girl who had seen in him the man he could become. When he fell asleep that night, with Sofia in his arms and the sound of his baby boy's breathing in the next room, Diego realized that he had truly become the richest man in the world. Not because he had $3 billion in the bank, but because he had 3 people who loved him for who he was. Mary, Joseph, and himself finally reconciled with life. Because in the end, true wealth is not measured in euros, but in smiles, hugs, and hearts that beat together. Like if you believe that true love cannot be bought with money. Comment on which moment in history had the greatest impact on you. Share to inspire those who still believe in authentic values. Subscribe for more love stories that transcend social divides. Sometimes the hardest test isn't the one you put others through, but the one life puts you through. Sometimes the right person was always right under your eyes, but you never really saw them. And sometimes the richest heart is hidden in the simplest person. Because true love is recognized by how a person uses power when they receive it.